The seating chart said she belonged by the kitchen door, hidden behind a potted palm while the city's elite laughed in crystal and silk. They thought she was the mistake. They thought she was the help. But when the doors swung open and the man who owns half of Manhattan walked in, he didn't look at the billionaires, the movie stars, or the frantic social climbers. He looked right at the back of the room. The moment he knelt before the woman in the cheap dress, the laughter didn't just stop. It died. Because the woman they mocked wasn't just his wife, she was the one holding the leash. The invitation was heavy, cream-colored cardstock embossed with gold leaf, weighing nearly 4 ounces. It was the kind of stationery that whispered old money and shouted exclusion. The Vanderbilt Hall at the Grand Central Terminal had been transformed into a breathing kaleidoscope of diamonds, black ties, and the heavy, cloying scent of imported Casablanca lilies. This was the Gilded Horizon Gala, the single most important networking event of the New York fiscal year. Iris stood at the entrance, clutching a small beaded clutch that she had bought at a consignment shop in Brooklyn 3 years ago. Her dress was a simple, floor-length navy silk. Elegant but clearly lacking the aggressive branding of the surrounding crowd. It didn't scream Dior or Versace. It whispered functionality. Name? The woman at the check-in desk didn't look up. Her fingers flew across an iPad, her manicured nails clicking like skeletal teeth. Iris, Kincaid, she said, using her maiden name. It was a test, a necessary one. The woman paused. She finally looked up, her eyes sweeping over Iris with a practiced, dissecting gaze. She took in the lack of jewelry, no Harry Winston drop earrings, no Cartier bracelet, and the simple bun of her dark hair. A microscopic sneer touched the corner of her mouth. "Ah, yes, the additional guest list," the woman said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She reached under the table and pulled out a plain white card, distinct from the gold-rimmed ones given to the previous guests. "You are seated at table 44. Iris took the card. "Thank you. Where is that located?" "It's in the annex," the woman said, waving a vague hand toward the far back of the massive hall, past the orchestra, past the VIP circle, and dangerously close to the swinging double doors where servers were currently hauling crates of champagne. "Enjoy the evening." Iris walked into the hall. The noise hit her first, a roar of polite conversation, the clink of baccarat crystal, and the low hum of a string quartet playing a sanitized version of Vivaldi. She navigated through the sea of tuxedos and gowns. She passed table 1, the power circle. She recognized the CEO of JP Morgan and a famous tech mogul who had just bought a private island. She passed table 5, where a Hollywood actress was laughing loudly at a joke made by a senator. She kept walking. The tables became less decorated. The centerpieces shrank from towering floral sculptures to modest bouquets. Finally, she reached the very edge of the room. Table 44 was a small circular table shoved into a drafty corner. It was so close to the service entrance that every time a waiter exited, a gust of warm, onion-scented air hit the occupants. One leg of the table was shorter than the others, propped up by a folded napkin. 2 other people were already seated there. One was an exhausted-looking photographer checking his lenses, and the other was a young, terrified intern who looked like he had been invited by mistake. "Great view," Iris murmured to herself, pulling out the chair. It scraped loudly against the floor, causing a few heads at the nearby table 40 to turn and glare. One of those heads belonged to Victoria St. James. Victoria was the embodiment of Fifth Avenue aggression. She was wearing a custom red Valentino gown that cost more than most people's college tuition. She was the daughter of a real estate tycoon and the current vice president of operations for St. James Realty. She was also the reason Iris was here. Victoria turned her entire body, holding a flute of Dom Perignon like a weapon. She squinted, then nudged the man beside her, Preston Waldorf, a hedge fund manager known for shorting pharmaceutical stocks and his blindingly white veneers. "Preston, look," Victoria's voice carried, sharp and clear over the strings. "Is that the new charity case HR was talking about? The diversity hire?" Iris sat down, smoothing her dress. She kept her back straight. She could feel Victoria's eyes boring into her skull. "I think she's lost," Preston chuckled, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "Hey, sweetheart, coat check is in the lobby. You're in the dining area." Laughter rippled through table 40 and bled into table 39. It wasn't warm laughter. It was the jagged sound of wolves realizing there was a wounded deer in the clearing. Iris didn't turn. She placed her napkin in her lap with deliberate precision. Wait, she told herself, just wait. The first course was a lobster bisque with truffle foam. At table 44, the soup arrived lukewarm. The waiter, harried and sweating, practically threw the bowls down before rushing back to the VIP sector. Iris picked up her spoon. She had barely taken a sip when a shadow fell over her table. Victoria St. James stood there, flanked by two of her lieutenants, socialites who mimicked her style but lacked her predatory instinct. Victoria swirled her glass, the golden liquid catching the light of the chandeliers. So, Victoria said, not bothering to lower her voice, Iris, was it? I saw the manifest. Kincaid. Nobody knows a Kincaid. Who did you have to persuade to get a seat even this far back? The janitor. Iris looked up. Her eyes were a striking clear grey. I received an invitation, Victoria, same as you. Same as me? Victoria laughed, a harsh barking sound. She leaned in, her expensive perfume, something heavy with musk and jasmine, suffocating the air. Honey, my invitation was hand-delivered by a courier. Yours looks like it was printed at a FedEx office. Look at you. You're wearing… What is that? Polyester? She reached out and flicked the fabric of Iris's sleeve. It's tragic, really. This event is for the movers and shakers of the global economy. It's for people who matter. You're sitting next to the kitchen because that's where the garbage goes. The young intern at table 44 turned pale and looked down at his soup, terrified of drawing Victoria's fire. I'm here to listen to the keynote speaker, Iris said calmly, removing Victoria's hand from her arm with a gentle but firm grip. I hear the CEO of Kensington Global has an announcement. Victoria yanked her hand back as if burned. Dominic Kensington. She scoffed, looking back at Preston, who had wandered over. She thinks she's here for Dominic. Preston, did you hear that? The mouse wants to see the lion. Preston smirked, adjusting his silk tie. Dominic doesn't do charity in the romantic sense, darling. He eats companies for breakfast. If he saw you sitting here, he'd probably have security escort you out for lowering the property value of the room. He's actually quite charming, Iris said, taking a sip of water. The table erupted in laughter again. Victoria wiped a tear of mirth from her eye. Oh, that is rich. You've read about him in Forbes, and now you think you know him. Listen to me, you little leech. When Dominic arrives, I'm going to be the first one to greet him. My father and I are closing a deal with him tonight to merge St. James Realty with his portfolio. I'm going to be sitting at his right hand. Victoria leaned down, her face inches from Iris's. And you? You're going to be watching from the cheap seats, praying the waiters drop a bread roll so you can eat. Do yourself a favor. Leave now. You're embarrassing the zip code. I think I'll stay, Iris said, her voice dropping an octave. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Victoria straightened up, her face twisting into a mask of disgust. Fine, but when security does their rounds, don't say I didn't warn you. She deliberately tilted her glass. A stream of sticky champagne cascaded down, splashing onto the hem of Iris's navy dress and soaking the tablecloth. Oops, Victoria said, her eyes dead cold. Clumsy me, maybe it'll wash out. Or maybe you can just throw it away. It's not like it cost anything. She turned on her heel and marched back to table 40, high-fiving Preston. The surrounding tables watched, entertained by the blood sport. No one offered a napkin, no one stood up. Iris looked at the stain on her dress. She picked up her cloth napkin and dabbed at it, her expression unreadable. Are you okay? The photographer whispered, leaning in. That was brutal. Who is she? She's a liability, Iris said softly. She just doesn't know it yet. The main doors of Vanderbilt Hall didn't just open. They were thrown wide by 4 liveried doormen. The music stopped instantly. The chatter died out as if someone had cut the power. A hush descended over the room, heavy with anticipation and fear. Dominic Kensington walked in. He was 6'3" of concentrated power. He wore a tuxedo that was cut so sharply it looked like it could draw blood, tailored on Savile Row. His hair was dark, swept back, and his eyes were the color of cold steel. He didn't walk, he stalked. Behind him trailed a phalanx of assistants, lawyers and security guards, all trying to keep pace with his long strides. Dominic was the man who had shorted the housing market before the crash, the man who had bought 3 airlines just to merge them because he didn't like the service on one of them. He was a billionaire in a room of millionaires. The room scrambled. At table 1, the CEO of JP Morgan stood up, buttoning his jacket. At table 5, the actress checked her makeup in a spoon. But Dominic's face was a mask of boredom. He bypassed the photographers screaming his name. He ignored the outstretched hand of the senator. He looked like a man who would rather be anywhere else on earth. Victoria St. James saw her moment. She sprang from table 40, smoothing her red dress, her face arranging itself into a practiced, seductive smile. She positioned herself directly in his path, flanked by Preston. "Dominic," she purred, stepping forward to block his route. "Mr. Kensington, it's Victoria St. James. My father told you I'd be here." Dominic stopped. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. The room held its breath. This was the merger everyone had been gossiping about. If Kensington backed St. James Realty, Victoria would be the Queen of New York. "St. James," Dominic said. His voice was a deep baritone that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "Yes, I recall the proposal." Victoria beamed, placing a familiar hand on his forearm. "We have the best table, Dominic. Right near the stage. We saved a seat for you. I ordered that vintage Cabernet you like. Forget the head table. Sit with us. We have so much to discuss regarding the acquisition." Preston chimed in, grinning. "We're the life of the party, sir. Table 40. Best view in the house." Dominic looked at Victoria's hand on his arm, then back at her face. He didn't smile. He gently but firmly removed her hand. "I'm not sitting at the head table," Dominic said, his eyes scanning the room over Victoria's head. "And I'm certainly not sitting at table 40. Victoria's smile faltered. "Oh? Then, where? We can move. We can—" "I'm looking for my wife," Dominic interrupted. The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria blinked. "Your wife? Dominic, you're single. Everyone knows that. You're the most eligible bachelor in the hemisphere." "I was," Dominic corrected. "Until this morning." He resumed his scan of the room. His eyes swept over the diamonds, the silks, the desperate faces of the elite. He looked past the centerpieces and the orchestra. Finally, his gaze locked onto the dark corner near the kitchen doors. His expression changed. The cold steel in his eyes melted. A look of intense, protective fury replaced the boredom. He started walking. "Dominic?" Victoria called out, confused. "Where are you going? The kitchen is that way. It's just the overflow seating. It's just the help back there." Dominic didn't hear her. He picked up his pace. He marched past the stunned tech mogul. He brushed past a waiter carrying a tray of filet mignon. He reached table 44. The intern was trembling. The photographer was frozen. Dominic stopped in front of the wobbly table. He looked at the drafty vent. He looked at the proximity to the trash cans. And then he looked at Iris. He saw the simple navy dress. He saw the lack of jewelry. And then his eyes narrowed as he saw the wet, sticky stain of champagne on her lap. He didn't say a word. He dropped to one knee on the hard marble floor, ruining his $3,000 suit trousers, and took Iris's hand in his. "Iris," he said, his voice soft, intimate, yet audible to the silent room. "I told you to take the limo. Why are you sitting here?" Iris smiled, a tired, sad smile. She looked past Dominic to where Victoria stood, pale and trembling. "They told me I didn't belong with the important people, Dom," Iris said clearly. "They said table 44 was where the garbage goes." Dominic slowly stood up. He didn't let go of her hand. He turned to face the room. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Who?" Dominic asked. The word was a gunshot. "Who put my wife at this table?" The silence in Vanderbilt Hall was heavy, suffocating. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes a natural disaster. Mr. Galloway, the event coordinator, materialized out of the ether. He was a small, nervous man in a tuxedo that was slightly too tight. He was wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief, his eyes darting between Dominic Kensington, the furious billionaire, and Victoria St. James, the terrified socialite. "Mr. Kensington," Galloway squeaked, bowing slightly. "Mr. Kensington, I apologize. There must have been a clerical error, a terrible misunderstanding. We can move your wife to the head table immediately. We have a seat right next to the governor." Dominic didn't look at Galloway. He was still looking at the champagne stain on Iris's dress. He reached out, his thumb brushing the damp silk. "This isn't water," Dominic murmured. He brought his fingers to his nose. "Vintage champagne. Sticky." He slowly stood to his full height, turning his back on the trembling Galloway to face Victoria St. James. Victoria was holding her breath. Her face, usually a mask of arrogant perfection, was cracking. The makeup settled into the lines of fear around her mouth. She took a step back, her heels clicking on the marble, but she bumped into Preston, who looked like he wanted to dissolve into the floor. "Victoria," Dominic said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "My wife's dress is ruined. And since she was seated at a table so far from the service bar, I can only assume someone brought the champagne to her, specifically to spill it. It was an accident, Dominic," Victoria stammered, her voice pitching high. She tried to force a laugh, but it came out as a dry choke. "I was just coming over to say hello, to welcome her. And I tripped. The floor is uneven back here. Really, you should sue the venue." "You welcomed her," Dominic repeated flatly. "Yes, of course." Victoria gained a little confidence, smoothing her red dress. "I saw her sitting all alone, and I felt terrible. I just wanted to make her feel included. Ask Preston." Preston saw the whole thing. Dominic shifted his gaze to Preston Waldorf. The hedge fund manager froze. He looked at Victoria, then at the predator staring at him. Loyalty in their world was a currency, and Preston just realized his account was overdrawn. Preston swallowed hard. "I didn't see exactly how it happened, sir. I was looking at the orchestra." Victoria gasped, betraying him instantly. "Preston, you liar." Dominic turned back to his wife. He looked down at Iris, who was still seated, her hands folded calmly in her lap. "Iris," Dominic said gently, "is that what happened? Did she trip?" Iris looked up. Her grey eyes were clear, devoid of malice but filled with a devastating truth. She didn't need to yell, she didn't need to cry, she just needed to speak. "She told me I was trash," Iris said, her voice carrying through the silent hall. "She said I was sitting where the garbage goes. She said the stain wouldn't matter because my dress didn't cost anything. And then she poured it." The gasp that went through the room was audible. At table 5, the actress covered her mouth. Dominic's jaw tightened, a muscle feathered in his cheek. "She called you trash," Dominic whispered, the words sounding like grinding stones. "She also mentioned the merger," Iris continued, standing up slowly. She brushed the crumbs from her lap. "She told me that you were going to merge Kensington Global with St. James Realty tonight. That she would be sitting at your right hand." Iris took a step toward Victoria. For the first time, the guests noticed something. Iris wasn't slouching. She wasn't shrinking. She stood with the posture of a queen, her chin high, her presence filling the space just as much as Dominic's. "But there's a problem with that, Victoria," Iris said softly. Victoria blinked, trembling. "What? What problem?" Iris looked at Dominic. He nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. He reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a folded document. It was the merger agreement, the papers that represented $3 billion of real estate consolidation. "The problem," Dominic said, holding the papers up for the room to see, "is that you seem to think I run Kensington Global alone." He tossed the papers onto the sticky, stained tablecloth of table 44. "I am the public face of the company," Dominic announced, his voice booming now, addressing every soul in the room. "I handle the acquisitions, I handle the press. But I don't make the final decisions on partnerships. I don't vet the character of the people we work with." He gestured to Iris. "My wife does." The room spun. Victoria grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. "Iris isn't just my wife," Dominic continued, enjoying the shockwaves rippling through the crowd. "She is the majority shareholder of Kensington Global. She operates under her maiden name for privacy. She is the head of strategy. She is the one who flagged St. James Realty as a potential partner." Dominic stepped closer to Victoria, looming over her. You didn't just bully a random guest, Victoria. You just poured champagne on the woman who was deciding whether or not to buy your father's company. Victoria St. James looked as though she had been struck by lightning. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The red dress, once a symbol of her dominance, now looked like a costume, a gaudy wrapper on a hollow package. "No," she whispered. That's not possible. She's wearing... Look at her." "I'm wearing a dress I like," Iris said, cutting her off. "It's comfortable, and unlike yours, it's paid for." Iris walked around the table. She picked up the contract Dominic had thrown down. "I came here tonight incognito for a reason," Iris addressed the group, her voice gaining strength. "I wanted to see how the leadership of St. James Realty behaves when they think no one important is watching. My husband told me the numbers looked good, the profits were high, but I told him, Dom, culture eats strategy for breakfast. If the leadership is rotten, the company will rot." She looked at the contract, then back at Victoria. "You failed the test, Victoria, spectacularly." "Please," Victoria begged, finally realizing the gravity of the situation. Tears, real ones this time, welled in her eyes. "Iris, Mrs. Kensington, please, I was stressed. I was jealous. I didn't know who you were. If I had known..." "If you had known, you would have kissed my ring," Iris said coldly. "And that is exactly the problem. You treat people well only when you fear them or need them. That isn't leadership. That's cowardice." Iris took the heavy document in both hands. With a sharp, tearing sound that echoed like a gunshot in the quiet hall, she ripped the cover page in half. Then she ripped it again. "The merger is dead," Iris declared. "Kensington Global will not be acquiring St. James Realty. Furthermore, we will be liquidating our current holdings in your father's subsidiary companies effective tomorrow morning when the markets open." "You can't do that," Preston Waldorf shouted, suddenly finding his voice as he realized his own portfolio was about to crash. "That will tank the stock. You'll wipe out millions in value." Dominic stepped between Preston and Iris. "We can, and we will. We can afford the loss. Can you?" Preston went pale and sat down heavily in an empty chair. Dominic turned to Mr. Galloway, the event manager who was still wringing his hands. "Galloway," Dominic barked. Yes, Mr. Kensington." "This table," Dominic pointed to the wobbly, drafty table 44. "Who else is sitting here?" The young intern and the photographer raised their hands timidly. "What are your names?" Dominic asked, his tone softening instantly. "Leo," the intern squeaked. "Sarah," the photographer said. "Leo, Sarah." Dominic nodded. "You sat with my wife. You didn't mock her. You treated her with basic human decency, while the so-called elite at table 40 laughed." Dominic pulled out a black titanium credit card and held it out to Galloway. "I want you to clear table 1, Dominic ordered. Galloway's eyes bulged. "Table 1? But sir, that's the mayor's table. That's the VIP. "I don't care," Dominic said. "Move them. Put them at table 44. Put them in the kitchen. I don't care where they go. But table 1 belongs to Leo and Sarah now." He turned to the stunned pair. "Go, enjoy the steak. Order the 1942 Chateau Lafite. If anyone gives you trouble, tell them you're with me." Leo and Sarah stood up, grabbing their bags, looking like they had won the lottery. As they hurried toward the front of the room, the crowd parted for them like the Red Sea. "As for you," Dominic turned back to Victoria, "and you, Preston, and everyone at table 40 who found my wife so amusing." He pointed to the exit doors. "Get out." Victoria stared at him. You're kicking us out? My father bought a platinum table. We paid $50,000 for these seats." "Consider it a refund on your karma," Dominic said. "Security." 4 large men in dark suits materialized from the shadows. They didn't need to touch Victoria. The sheer humiliation was force enough. "I will ruin you," Victoria screamed as she backed away, her composure shattering completely. "I will tell everyone. I will write op-eds. You think you're gods. You're just bullies with money." "No, Victoria," Iris said calmly, watching her go. "We're just the people who sign your checks, and we just stopped writing them." Victoria turned and fled, her red dress trailing behind her, followed by a scurrying Preston and their entourage. The doors slammed shut behind them, leaving a vibrating silence in the hall. Dominic turned to Iris. The anger vanished from his face, replaced by concern. He touched her cheek. "Are you okay?" "I am now," Iris smiled, leaning into his touch. "But I'm still hungry. And I believe I was promised a keynote speech." "Forget the speech," Dominic said, taking off his tuxedo jacket and wrapping it around her shoulders to cover the stain. "And forget this party. The air in here is stale." He looked around the room. The hundreds of guests were staring at them, terrified, wondering if they were next. "We're leaving," Dominic announced to the room. "But before we go, I have one final announcement regarding the charity fund everyone is so eager to support tonight." The room perked up. This was the Gilded Horizon charity supporting urban housing. Everyone had donated heavily to impress Dominic. Dominic looked at Iris. "Do you want to tell them, or shall I?" Iris stepped forward. "The anonymous donor who matched all your contributions tonight, the one who put up the $5 million starting grant." She paused, letting the tension build. "That was me," Iris said. "The woman at table 44. She looked at the sea of shocked faces. "I'm withdrawing the grant from this organization," she said calmly. "I realized tonight that this charity is just a gala for people to wear nice clothes and feel good about themselves while treating the actual working class like furniture. I will be taking my $5 million and opening a direct aid foundation, one where you don't need a tuxedo to get in the door." She took Dominic's arm. "Let's go get a burger, Dom. I know a place in Queens that has excellent seating." Dominic laughed, a rich, genuine sound that startled the room. "Lead the way, boss." They began to walk out, but as they reached the double doors, a voice called out from the crowd, "Wait!" It was an older man, leaning on a cane. It was Arthur St. James. Victoria's father. He had just arrived, missing the fireworks, but seeing the exodus of his daughter. He looked from the crying Victoria in the lobby to Dominic and Iris standing at the door. He hobbled forward, his face grey. "Kensington," Arthur rasped. "Please, my daughter, she is foolish, spoiled." "But the merger, the company, thousands of jobs depend on this. You cannot destroy a legacy over a spilled drink." Dominic stopped. He didn't turn around fully, just looked over his shoulder. "It wasn't about the drink, Arthur," Dominic said. "It was about the laughter. You raised a daughter who laughs at people she thinks are beneath her. Now she knows how it feels to be the one on the outside looking in." "Is there no way to fix this?" Arthur pleaded. "Anything, name your price." Iris stopped. She turned slowly. She looked at the old man, a titan of industry reduced to begging. "There is one way," Iris said. Arthur's eyes lit up with hope. "Yes? Anything?" "I want to see the seating chart for your next gala," Iris said, "and I want to see your daughter's name on it." "Done," Arthur said. "Head table?" "No." Iris smiled, and it was a smile that promised retribution. "Table 44, by the kitchen, next to the trash. If she sits there and stays there for the entire night without a phone, without a complaint, then maybe we'll talk." Arthur St. James swallowed hard. He looked at the exit where his weeping daughter had vanished. He looked back at the billions of dollars walking out the door. "Table 44, Arthur whispered. "I'll make sure of it." Dominic and Iris walked out into the cool New York night, leaving the billionaires behind in a room that suddenly felt very cheap. The morning sun rose over Manhattan, but for the St. James dynasty, it was the beginning of a long, dark winter. By 8:30 a.m., the photograph taken by Sarah, the photographer from Table 44, had been licensed by the New York Times, Vanity Fair, and TMZ. The image was iconic. Dominic Kensington, the titan of industry, kneeling on dirty marble in a tuxedo, holding the hand of a woman in a stained navy dress, while Victoria St. James sneered in the background. The headline on the New York Post was brutal in its simplicity. "The billionaire, the bully, and the back of the room." Inside the penthouse of the St. James Tower, the mood was funereal. Victoria sat on a white leather sofa, scrolling through her phone, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped the device. "They're cancelling me," she whispered, horror dawning on her face. "Daddy, they're cancelling everything." Arthur St. James stood by the window, watching the ticker tape on his tablet. "It's worse than social media, Victoria. Look at the market." St. James Realty, SJR, was in freefall. The news that Kensington Global had liquidated their position triggered a panic sell-off. But it wasn't just the financials, it was the brand. The St. James name, previously associated with luxury and exclusivity, was now radioactive. "I can fix this," Victoria snapped, standing up. The denial was a drug she was overdosing on. "I'll go on the morning show. I'll tell them it was a misunderstanding. I'll say Iris was rude to me first. I'll cry. People love a redemption arc." "No," Arthur warned. "Victoria, stay quiet." But Victoria didn't listen. She called her publicist. She booked the interview. 2 hours later, she was live on national television. She wore a soft pink sweater, minimal makeup, and looked at the camera with wide, teary eyes. "I am the victim here," Victoria told the host, her voice wavering perfectly. "Iris Kincaid came into that party looking for trouble. She threw the drink on herself to frame me. She's a manipulator who tricked Dominic Kensington. I was just trying to help her, and she attacked me." It was a masterful performance. For a moment, social media wavered. Comments started appearing. "Maybe she's telling the truth. Is Iris Kincaid a gold digger?" Iris and Dominic were watching the broadcast from their brownstone in Brooklyn. Dominic reached for the remote to turn it off, his face dark with fury. "I'm going to buy that network just to fire her." "Don't bother," Iris said, sipping her coffee. She wasn't angry. She was typing on her laptop. She just made the classic mistake. She lied about something that has evidence. "What evidence?" Dominic asked. "Vanderbilt Hall has security cameras, Dom. High-definition, audio-enabled security cameras. I subpoenaed the footage an hour ago through our legal team." Iris hit enter. 30 minutes after Victoria's interview ended, Iris posted a single video file to the Kensington Global official Twitter account. No caption, just the timestamp. The video showed everything: the sneering, the garbage comment, the deliberate pour of the champagne, the laughter. The internet didn't just turn on Victoria, it devoured her. The hashtag #JakarTable44 trended globally. People began sharing their own stories of being bullied by the elite. It became a movement. By noon, the board of directors of St. James Realty called an emergency meeting. Preston Waldorf was the first casualty. His firm fired him before lunch to distance themselves from the scandal. He was photographed leaving his office with a cardboard box, weeping into his silk scarf. But the real blow came at 2:00 p.m. Arthur St. James walked into the living room, where Victoria was reading the comments, her face pale as a sheet. "The board just voted," Arthur said, his voice hollow. "It's okay, Daddy," Victoria said frantically. "We'll issue an apology. We'll donate to a shelter." "There is no we anymore, Victoria," Arthur said. "The board voted to remove you as VP of Operations, effective immediately. You're out." Victoria stared at him. You fired me? I'm your daughter." "You cost the company $400 million in 6 hours," Arthur roared, slamming his hand on the table. "You are toxic assets, Victoria, and thanks to your little interview, we are facing libel lawsuits from Kensington Global that could bankrupt us entirely." He threw a manila envelope onto the table. "Iris Kincaid called," Arthur said quietly. "She offered a settlement, a way to stop the lawsuits and the hostility, a way to save the company from total ruin." Victoria reached for the envelope. "What does she want? Money? A public apology?" "Read it," Arthur said, turning away because he couldn't bear to watch. Victoria opened the envelope. Inside was a single thick invitation card. It was for the New York Winter Solstice Ball, the next major event of the season. But it wasn't a normal invitation. It was a ticket for one. Name, Victoria St. James. Table, 44. Zone, service corridor, restroom access. There was a handwritten note attached in elegant cursive. "See you in December. Don't be late. Iris." 3 months later, the Winter Solstice Ball arrived, descending upon New York City with a blanket of hushed white snow. The venue was the Pierre Hotel, a choice that screamed old-world opulence. The ballroom was a cavern of gold leaf and crystal chandeliers, heated to a balmy 72 degrees despite the freezing wind howling down Fifth Avenue. The air smelled of expensive perfume, roast duck, and the metallic tang of unlimited wealth. Tonight, the social hierarchy of Manhattan was on full display. The seating chart was a political map of power. At the front, near the stage, sat the titans of industry, the political kingmakers, and the celebrities whose smiles graced the covers of magazines. But tonight the eyes of the room kept drifting away from the center stage. They were drawn, with a mixture of morbid curiosity and nervous whispers, to the very back of the room. Table 44 had been recreated. It wasn't a standard table that had simply been pushed back. It was a deliberate reconstruction of exile. Iris had requested it specifically as part of the settlement terms, and the event planners had followed her instructions to the letter. It was a small, unsteady round table, barely large enough for two people, positioned directly next to the heavy, swinging double doors of the service entrance. Every time a waiter burst through with a tray of used silverware or half-eaten appetizers, a gust of cold, stale air from the service corridor hit the table. The smell here wasn't of lilies or roast duck, it was of industrial dish soap and wet trash. And sitting there, utterly alone, was Victoria St. James. She was not wearing the signature red Valentino that had once been her armor. She was wearing a plain slate-grey dress purchased off the rack at a mid-tier department store. The fabric was stiff, scratching at her skin, a constant physical reminder of her fall. She wore no diamonds. Her wrists were bare. Her phone had been surrendered at the coat check, leaving her with nothing to hide behind. Victoria sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, staring at the empty white tablecloth. She felt naked. For 30 years, she had entered rooms like this as a queen, expecting the seas to part. Now she was an obstacle. "Excuse me," a waiter grunted, brushing past her chair with a heavy tray. The corner of the tray knocked against her shoulder. Victoria flinched, instinctively opening her mouth to snap a reprimand. "Do you know who I am?" The words formed on her tongue, ancient and reflexive, but they died in her throat. She knew exactly who she was now. She was the woman at table 44. The waiter didn't apologize. He didn't even look back. To him, she was just another piece of furniture in a crowded workspace. The humiliation burned in her chest, hot and suffocating. She looked up, her eyes scanning the vast ocean of the ballroom, seeking a familiar face, a lifeline. She saw Preston Waldorf standing near the bar, laughing loudly at a joke he probably didn't understand. Preston, who had spent summers on her father's yacht. Preston, who used to text her daily. He turned, his gaze sweeping over the room. For a split second, his eyes locked with hers. Victoria straightened slightly, a flicker of hope sparking in her chest. Preston's face didn't register friendship. It registered panic. He immediately looked away, turning his back to her as if she were contagious. He dove into a conversation with a stranger, terrified that being seen acknowledging her would infect his own fragile social standing. The realization hit Victoria with the force of a physical blow. The isolation wasn't just geographical, it was total. Far away, in the golden circle at table 1, sat Dominic and Iris. They looked like royalty from a different, better era. Dominic was leaning back, relaxed and laughing, his attention focused entirely on his wife. And Iris was breathtaking. She wore a gown of shimmering silver that seemed to capture the light of the chandeliers, looking like moonlight woven into fabric. She was radiant, not because of the jewels around her neck, but because of the genuine warmth in her smile as she spoke to the mayor. Victoria watched them, waiting for the old anger to rise. She waited for the indignation, the jealousy, the burning sense of injustice. But nothing came. Instead, a cold, hollow ache settled in her stomach. It was a profound loneliness that stripped away her defenses. She realized, with a terrifying clarity, that the way she felt right now, small, insignificant, and utterly ignored, was exactly how she had made Iris feel 3 months ago. It was how she had made everyone feel for her entire adult life. The first course was served. Lobster bisque. The waiter dropped the bowl in front of Victoria with a careless clatter. The soup sloshed over the rim, creating a messy orange puddle on the tablecloth. Victoria stared at the stain. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. She reached for her spoon, her hand trembling violently. "Just eat," she told herself, "just get through the night." Suddenly, the noise at the nearby tables died down. It wasn't a gradual lull, it was a sudden hush, sharp and immediate. Victoria kept her head down, assuming security was coming to escort her out for some infraction she didn't know she had committed. She braced herself for the flash of cameras. She braced herself for Dominic to come and gloat over his victory. A shadow fell over table 44. Victoria froze. She took a breath, steeling herself, and looked up. It wasn't Dominic. It was Iris. Iris stood there alone. There were no bodyguards flanking her, no photographers had been signaled to capture the moment. She held a simple crystal glass of water in her hand. The silence in the room was deafening now. Hundreds of eyes were fixed on the corner by the kitchen. The Queen of the Evening had left the VIP section to stand in the drafty exile of the service corridor. Victoria's voice was a raspy whisper. "Go ahead, pour it. I deserve it." She closed her eyes, waiting for the cold splash of water, waiting for the final act of karma to wash over her. But the splash never came. There was a soft clink as the glass was set gently onto the table. Victoria opened her eyes. The water sat there, clear and clean, catching the light. "I'm not you, Victoria," Iris said softly. The words were not spoken with malice. They were spoken with a quiet, devastating grace. Victoria looked at the water, then up at Iris's face. She saw no triumph in Iris's grey eyes. She saw only a calm, measuring look. "Why?" Victoria asked, her voice breaking. A single tear escaped, tracking through the powder on her cheek. "Why are you doing this? You could have destroyed me. You could have bought my father's company and fired us all. You could have ended us." Iris remained standing, her silver dress shimmering against the dull backdrop of the service doors. "Because destroying you doesn't fix you," she said. Iris reached out and pulled out the spare chair, the one with the wobbly leg that had been propped up with a folded napkin. She sat down. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. The billionaires at table 1 craned their necks. The guests whispered furiously behind their hands. Iris Kincaid was sitting at table 44. "My husband wanted to crush you," Iris admitted, her voice low enough that only Victoria could hear. "He wanted to bankrupt your family. He has the capital to do it. But I told him that poverty doesn't teach empathy. Experience does." Iris gestured around them, to the swinging kitchen doors, to the waiters sweating as they hauled heavy trays, to the guests who had their backs turned to them. "Tonight, you're seeing the world from the other side," Iris said. "You're seeing the people who serve you, the people you used to treat like furniture. How does it look from back here, Victoria?" Victoria looked at the waiter who had spilled her soup. He was leaning against the wall for a brief second, rubbing his lower back, looking exhausted. She looked at the drafty vent. She looked at the wall of backs turned against her. "It's lonely," Victoria whispered. "It's cold." "It is," Iris agreed, nodding slowly, "but the view is better." Victoria frowned, confused. "What? How?" "From here," Iris said, pointing toward the glittering crowd, "you can see the truth. You can see who the fake people are. Look at Preston. Look at the people you called friends. They aren't looking at you. They aren't wondering if you're okay. They only loved you for your seat at the front. The moment you moved back here, you ceased to exist for them." Victoria followed Iris's gaze. It was true. The entire room was a performance, and she had been kicked off the stage. Iris leaned in, her expression intense. "Real power isn't about where you sit, Victoria. It's not about the head table. It's about who is willing to sit with you when the music stops. It's about who stays when the champagne runs out." Iris stood up. She reached into her silver clutch. Victoria flinched again, expecting a subpoena, a bill, a list of demands. Instead, Iris pulled out a small, unassuming business card. It wasn't gold embossed. It was simple cardstock. It read, "The Kensington Foundation." "I'm opening a new community centre in the Bronx next month," Iris said. "We focus on housing and job placement for the homeless. We need a manager for operations, someone who knows how to organize logistics, someone who understands that details matter." She slid the card across the table, right next to the glass of water. "It's not a glamorous job," Iris continued. "The pay is average. The office is a converted warehouse. You won't be working with billionaires. You'll be working with people who have lost everything." Victoria stared at the card. Operations manager. It was a step down from vice president. It was a job for a nobody. "Why offer this to me?" Victoria asked, her voice barely audible. "Because you're smart," Iris said, "and you're efficient. You just directed all that energy in the wrong direction." Iris smoothed her dress. "If you want to earn your way back, not into society, but into humanity, show up at 8 a.m. on Monday." She looked pointedly at Victoria's grey dress. "And don't wear the dress. Wear jeans. You'll be painting walls." Iris didn't wait for an answer. She turned and walked away, the silver dress flowing behind her like armor, cutting a path back to the world of light and noise. Victoria sat alone in the draft. She looked at the card. She looked at the glass of water. She picked up the glass and took a sip. It was lukewarm. It was tap water. But as it slid down her dry throat, it felt like the first honest thing she had tasted in years. Monday morning arrived with a grey, drizzle-soaked dawn. At 7:55 a.m., the steel shutters of the Kensington Community Centre in the Bronx rattled open. The neighbourhood was rough. Graffiti covered the adjacent buildings, and the sound of sirens was a constant background hum. A black town car idled at the curb for a moment, then drove away. It didn't leave anyone behind. Instead, a woman walked up from the subway station. She walked hesitantly, clutching a coffee cup. She was wearing a pair of stiff, dark blue jeans that clearly hadn't been worn before, and a simple white t-shirt. Her hair was tied back in a messy ponytail. Victoria St. James stopped in front of the peeling paint of the centre's door. She took a deep breath of the gritty city air. Inside, she could see volunteers setting up tables. She saw a young mother with a toddler waiting in the lobby. She saw chaos that needed order. She reached into her pocket and touched the business card. Victoria pushed the door open. The bell above it jingled, a cheap, tinny sound. "I'm here for the operations job," she announced to the surprised volunteer at the desk. "Oh, great," the volunteer said, handing her a paint roller. "We're starting on the back wall. It's a mess back there." Victoria took the roller. She felt the weight of it in her hand. It was heavy. It was real. "The back wall," Victoria repeated, a small, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time in months. "That sounds perfect. That's exactly where I start." She walked past the front desk, heading toward the back of the room, ready to work. The story of Iris and Victoria isn't just about a seating chart. It's a reminder that the tables we build for ourselves can easily be turned. In a world obsessed with status, titles, and VIP access, it is easy to forget that character is the only currency that doesn't devalue when the market crashes. Victoria learned the hard way that arrogance is a loan taken out against your future, and eventually karma comes to collect the debt with interest. True nobility isn't found in a vintage wine or a designer gown. It's found in the quiet dignity of the person sitting at the wobbly table, knowing their worth isn't defined by their location. And that is how the queen of the back row took down an empire without raising her voice. If this story gave you chills, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What do you think? Did Victoria deserve a second chance, or should Iris have been harsher? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story about justice being served. Thanks for watching, and remember, be careful who you step on. They might be the one holding the ladder.